to really explore like the spiritual dimension, there's a vulnerable part of yourself that you have to experience. If the person is not ready to do that and they don't want to do that and they say, no, 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 we don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. No, 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 no. You know, sometimes it's because they're guarding that vulnerability. And so it just, in many cases, it's a matter of time for them to be held in the right kind of way so that they can feel the safety to explore that vulnerability and kind of come to that, oh, wow, that's actually part of this.
Con la vida, vida de la baila, cura con la guaira, limpia, limpia, taita, vibrando con la hualca. In this episode of Ayahuasca podcast, I interview Joe Tafur. Joe is both a medical doctor and a curandero, so he is great at explaining the healing from both sides. So we talk about that. We talk about how ayahuasca work, and both from spiritual perspective, energy perspective, and also from the physical perspective. We talk about why healing is a state of receptivity. We talk about importance of healthy skepticism. Talk about different types of ayahuasca. We compare Colombian ayahuasca with Peruvian ayahuasca. And we also talk about how science and spirituality are slowly becoming to merge. Joe also talks about how psychedelic renaissance is leading us as a society to become closer to spirituality. It's a very fascinating, interesting episode, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. Hi, guys, and welcome to ayahuascapodcast.com. As always, with you, host Sam Believ. Today, I'm going to interview Joe Tafur. Joe Tafur is an author. He wrote the book A Fellowship of the River. Joe is a medical doctor, speaker, and he's also a curandero. So 3 different people recommended me to interview Joe, and finally we made it happen. So I'm very excited. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Nice to be here.
Joe, so you, in my opinion, are a perfect person to bridge those 2 worlds, modern medicine and shamanism, Amazonian shamanism. But before we go into that, can you tell people, how did you end up going from being a doctor to being a curandero?
Yeah, I kind of was, I, in medical school, I got depressed, and I was looking for help. And I was always interested in integrative medicine, alternative medicine. I wanted to be part of that eventually, but I was still, had to go through the training. And I ended up going to a peyote ceremony in Arizona. Here, it's a place called the Peyote Way, which is open to people to go and have an experience. They call it the Spirit Walk. And I had that experience, and it was a big deal. It really, really helped me. It really shifted things for me, and very rapidly. And I just felt like, wow, that was amazing. This kind of plant spirit medicine approach, and the ceremonial approach, and the link to the kind of the nature and the ancestral traditions. And so I was very curious about that, and I stayed curious about that. And I returned to that ceremony a few times through the rest of my training. Not very many times, a few times over the course of the next few years. And then my family is from Colombia. My parents, all my family is Colombian, and I knew about ayahuasca. I knew my family's not from the jungle, but they knew about it. They heard about it, and I had family friends that were connected to it. And so I knew that existed, and I thought, wow, if this is how peyote works for me, and this is what happens with that, I just had this growing curiosity, to see what's that like. And I knew I wanted to go try it one day. And so I had decided to do that. And I waited till I was done with my training, and I had more opportunity. And I met somebody that at the time, I went the first time in 2007. And at that time, I don't know, for my family in Colombia, they were nervous about me as an American going into the Amazon there. It's a little more trouble, a little more problems there. I didn't have any contacts there personally. So I had an opportunity to go to Peru with Shipibos in Peru through people that I knew. And I went and I entered ceremony there, and I had a huge experience. I had a very big experience, and that made me more curious. And I saw what the kind of healing that was happening there at the center. And as a doctor, I was very impressed. And so I started going back, I started going back. And then they said, hey, if you bring a group, you don't have to pay. Why don't you bring some people? So I started bringing groups, and then eventually become friends with one of the healers, Ricardo Maringo. And he says, hey, I want to start my own center. Why don't you join us? Why don't you help us? And at that time, I was very interested in doing that. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking of going down the path of becoming ayahuasquero or curandero. I kind of had enough of all my training, with medical and everything. It was just like, okay, I don't really want to go through anything more like that. But then he kind of convinced me, and as part of working there, I went through the training alongside him, and I enjoyed it, and I liked it, and I was very fascinated by it. So that's how.
Well, as I listened to you, I realized we have some similarities. My journey also started with depression, and I never planned to start a retreat. It kind of happened to me as well. I guess that's just how it works in this world. So you worked with ayahuasca in Peru, right? But I think you did end up venturing to Colombia eventually.
Yes. Yeah. No, I've been working in Colombia as well, and running retreats with my friend and colleague there, Sochi, Pukuru, and Sasaima. And so she trained in the Amazon, but she's from Tolima, Colombia.
Yeah, because you're from Colombia, but I am in Colombia, and for some reason everyone I talk to, they assume I know you. They're like, "Oh, you must know Joe. You must know Joe," and this is why I'm interviewing. So my question is, a lot of people ask me, in Colombia, ayahuasca is called Yage. It's a very similar, very very similar medicine, but there are very minor differences. Have you noticed personally, what is the biggest difference in your opinion between Colombian ayahuasca or Yage, Peruvian ayahuasca?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically the same plants, So you're talking about different plants in a different region, so that's going to have a different energy a little bit, being from a different place, just like the people from this place to that place. They're all humans, but they have a different flavor, influenced by the land, the soil, the wind, the sun, like the wine and everything else. So I think it's more subtle in the sense that there's some people that would really talk about the big difference, or they're very focused on the differences, or they're very focused on the substance. But I think that within Colombia, there's going to be a wide range of yahe, from different practitioners, from different preparations, very wide. Same is true in Peru. And that being said, it's still yahe, it's still ayahuasca made from the plant. So, I think well prepared, well carried through, it can be helpful. I don't know. I don't distinguish it so much. I think for me, sometimes they say it depends, and it depends on who you talk to. Some Colombian yajecero will say it's not uncommon to hear that they say, oh, the Shipibos are adding a lot of chacruna. They want more visions. They want it to be stronger like that. We prefer it more purgative, stronger in the ayahuasca vine. You hear comments like that, but it depends. I think it really depends. And some of those comments are not coming from like the most wide exposure. They maybe they never even met a Shipibo person when they say things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting that people, when they think about shamans or indigenous people, for some reason they think they're completely saint and they have no emotions. But in reality, I also notice they tend to be a little bit territorial about those things. They want to believe that their medicine is the best, which I think is just part of our human nature. What I've heard is that Peruvian ayahuasca lasts a little longer, and Colombian ayahuasca tends to be a little more intense, but lasts a little less. So I've never tried Peruvian ayahuasca.
I heard the other way. I think
Yeah.
the ayahuasca I drink from my friend from Sochi in that she gets from Colombian Amazon, I would say a lot of times it lasts longer,
Mm,
than what I'm drinking in Peru. It depends,
yeah.
I just don't think it's not easy to generalize something like that.
Interesting also that you use the wine analogy. That's the analogy I like to use. I like to say it's kind of like Cabernet and Sauvignon, it's still red wine. But, some people might say, it's disrespectful to compare those two things. But yeah,
That's right.
everything affects it, the soil, the weather. So as a medical doctor, you observe healing with ayahuasca, and I know you work with other psychedelics. What do probably you're one of the better people to explain what is that happens, how does ayahuasca healing work?
Well, I think that it depends, but one of the goals, would I say, that the spiritual healing that the tradition talks about is like an easier way for the Western person to see where that kind of um, I don't know, sometimes it makes more sense to them is emotional healing, that there's a big emotional processing shift that can happen for people. So helping people, and in that emotional processing shift, there's also other like Western concepts that people could relate to, like regulating your nervous system, that the person is not as triggered or not as burdened by past conditioning, things that condition them, traumas that condition them, that maybe they didn't serve them to adjust, to adapt to certain kinds of things that they went through. And so then as they come into healthier circumstances or healthier environments, still that stuff from the past is still with them. So it's like clearing and cleaning, the energies of the past and opening yourself up to a more a new opportunity, a chance to relearn some things that maybe you didn't learn so well. Um, it's like a new opening, there's many aspects to it. It's very complicated and the possibilities are very wide ranging. So there's some stuff on your brain, there's stuff in your body, there's stuff in your emotional well-being. There's part of it that is spiritual that a lot of people would think of in those terms or describe in those terms. So it depends, it's complicated.
It's a big question, I understand that, but for example, medically speaking, most of the active molecules in ayahuasca, they're out of your system within 12 hours, but sometimes the change stays for you for the lifetime. What do you think happens there?
Well, something's changing in your body, something's rearranging, something's reorganizing. So you're allowing an opening, let's say like a bigger neural plasticity, perhaps an opening for your neural networks to reorganize, or for different parts of your kind of wiring, your patterning within your physical body, within your being, that is going to be given the opportunity to kind of become plastic again. What was kind of settled and kind of stuck in a rut or in a routine in a set way gets an opportunity to reorganize. And so, if the healing is good, if there's a transformational healing, then there would be some kind of reorganization within the system, even at the physical level.
Yeah, it's painfully difficult to describe ayahuasca healing without using any spiritual terms or talking about spiritual side of it. Can you now explain it again, but as a curandero?
As a curandero, then you're and the way I talk about it in my books and stuff is just and with the Western perspective is mixing the two, is just there's an emotional dimension to your well-being, that has energetic implications. That's a way to talk about it. That's what we feel, that's what we experience. And so there's energy that we carry within us, from trauma, from things that we've been through. And so releasing that energy is important. Cleaning and clearing that energy, processing that energy is important to help kind of remove blockages, in the flow of being within ourselves. And in that same sense, that the spirit can help us to do that. That the spirit, attuning to the spirit, connecting to the spirit, can open us to a resource, that would help someone um, be able to work through in those processes. For example, somebody working through traumas of their early childhood, and being guided by ayahuasca to, go through a healing around what happened to them as a child, or go through a healing and how they relate to their parents, like that context within the spiritual realm, how people would kind of say, oh, that's not real, or oh, they the challenges their brain, but then emotionally it was real. The person had a significant shift within them, and a felt shift, an energetic shift that is very real to them. And even though there is a great mystery behind the way some of it happens, still the rubber hits the road at some point. So the mystery, nobody really understands the mystery completely. That's why it's a mystery. So we engage with the mystery, we work with the mystery, but we don't have to be, it doesn't have to be defined, for us to be able to draw upon it, to help. And so as a curandero, like, then, different traditions are different. Inga, I'm not familiar so much. In Shipibo tradition, it's with master plants, that you train and you learn from the plants of the forest, that they're going to help guide the education around how to work with people in ceremony, how to help them, facilitate like healing within their energy being, in their energy body, within their emotional body, within their emotional being. And so that is an intuitive process, that's guided through kind of traditional education, that, again, whether people believe in it or they don't believe in it, it doesn't seem to matter, actually,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something there. There's something mystical. So the curandero side is open to the mysterious elements of the practice and of the healing.
I think there is room for a healthy amount of skepticism, because in this sort of new world of New Age spirituality, there's a lot of things that I don't think are real. But working with ayahuasca for several years, especially observing, thousands of people go through their process, I definitely stretched my skepticism quite a bit, and I included terms now like energy and things like that that probably would make me shudder a little bit 5 years ago or so. But nevertheless, I do believe they're true. I think that it's a complete picture with both spiritual and physical, energetical and physical, and it's hard to explain something with the one side or another. It has to be a complete explanation. Same comes with the way plants themselves work on you. Part of ayahuasca healing is physical purge, and it can be explained. Another part is very spiritual. What are your thoughts on the effort by medical establishment now to sort of separate those medicines, the spiritual part of it from the physical part of it, and just kind of make a molecule that tries to fix you but take away the spiritual side of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very impressive approach, So like you said, you came with your mentality and your ideas and your skepticism, which is good. The wise skepticism. You want to be skeptical. It's intelligent to be careful. But then you're there and you observe and you get more involved and you see the results, and you see the benefit of incorporating these other elements into what's being done with those people, at your center. It's not being done to, I don't know, for the benefit of the healers, just to say, because they believe in it and they like to hear themselves talk about things like that. They could be, sure, you can be extra superstitious. You can bring elements to it that maybe aren't as crucial or important, but still you're saying it yourself, like you've been there for a few years and you say, whoa, if you can't leave this part completely out of it. So then they, of course, come to the party the way you know, I mean, without just saying, that's how they're showing up, you know. Basically, you could say inexperienced. And so they come with their whatever mechanical model of the world, and you know, basically sometimes an arrogance, you know, with that energy. And in general, a lot of times what you see, and maybe you've seen this there at your center, that rigid kind of mental framework a lot of times is protecting, you know, kind of an emotional vulnerability, you know, to really explore like the spiritual dimension. There's a vulnerable part of yourself that you have to experience, you know. That's true. And so if the person is not ready to do that, and they don't want to do that, and they say, no, 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 we don't have to do that, you don't have to do that, no, 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 you know, sometimes it's because they're guarding that vulnerability. And so it just, in many cases, it's a matter of time for them to be held in the right kind of way so that they can feel the safety to explore that vulnerability and kind of come to that, oh, wow, that's actually part of this. So, I mean, we have to have compassion for that perspective. I don't know how threatening that perspective is, you know, to the practice, because so far all they have is like a lot of talk, you know. They don't have anything to back up what they're saying. They're just telling people, oh, shouldn't it be like this? How come it's not like this? We should be able to do it just with the molecules. Okay, you know, go ahead. Like, well, you know, what's stopping you? And so I think that it kind of remains to be seen. And so I think there's a little funky thing where there's an arrogance in the air from that side that's making it sound like it's so convincing where they're coming from. But I think if we really look at the evidence, it's like, okay, there's room for healthy skepticism over what they're saying. If we're honestly skeptical, well, then we should be skeptical of that. Like, where is this that you're talking about, that you know how to do this? You know, are the people flying from all over the world to go out to the jungle to meet you, to receive from what you're giving them? Or is it just like a laboratory idea on a white paper to raise investment? Is that what it is? Because probably that's what it is, because I don't see all the people going to so far. It may become more. I'm open to the idea that it could be much more, but I think we can be skeptical that so far we're still waiting to hear, you know, what they have to say.
I like something you said in the other podcast, that they've tried it before to separate the medicine from the spirituality, and what they ended up with was the antidepressants. And we all know
Right.
how it works or doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's like. And so why did they come up with antidepressants, or what? Yeah, it's a business concept. You know, they're not. It's, if you're selling an idea, a business idea, sure, you know, you want to talk it up and say, hey, I think we can do this, and I think we can do that. But that may not be the case. You know, it might be a flop. If it's just a business idea, if it's not rooted in actual practical experience with medicine and healing, then it might just be a flop, you know, like any other new business idea.
Yeah, it can also be hurtful long term, like some antidepressants unfortunately are. I mean, they're a good tool for a lot of people in desperate situations, but they don't seem to get rid of the core of the issue.
And you're right,
Regarding
and they can do damage over time. Some of those medications, you know, really prolonged use, it can be damaging to the system.
So yeah, maybe they will figure out a way to put a shaman in a pill as well, and you take 2 pills somehow. Yeah, it's
Sure.
you know, what you talk about skepticism and science, you know, science is observation, right? If you observe something and it keeps repeating, then you can create science, right? You do studies about it. So if you come to this world of ayahuasca and you observe people getting over depression over and over again, then you believing in it doesn't mean you're just believing it out of faith. You know, you actually have your own little science, you know, N of 1, and you know that it works, or if it worked for you personally. It worked for me personally. So you get to believe in it. So I guess that's just normal, right?
It's observation. And so then being down there and living there with those people, you realize, oh, well, they're observing it too. Like, just because they're not from my culture doesn't mean that they're idiots. It's like, guess what? They're speaking from their observation. They're not just saying it, trying to convince you to believe in whatever they're talking about, And so that skepticism is like, can be, as part of the openness, is like, okay, well, let's listen to somebody. Let's get to know who we're talking to, before we just say, oh, they're just savages. They don't believe, they don't believe in, the truth.
Yeah. Speaking of science and spirituality, I think you spoke about it as well, where inevitably they meet each other. When, for example, when we go to like quantum physics, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that they're just, it's back to what we were saying about observation. That there's an element of spiritual practice, and that's coming out of observation. Thousands of years of observation. There's layers of ignorance that can be put on top of that, but some of it is actual study. People studying Hindu, philosophers studying, meditation, or people all over the world with their spiritual study, observing, this is what we see. This is what we think. This is how the world works. Like, there's that projection. Sure, there's room for that projection, but there's also the observation is still there. Similarly, the science is, it's observing, it's observing for sure. But then you witnessed it yourself, how the prejudices that the politics that would govern, even such a field where it's just simple observation. But it's observation where we don't allow those people's observations to be part of the system. Only these observations, And so then you see, oh, well, there's some arbitrary distinctions here. So then science becomes a belief system at some point. Obviously the evidence-based part of it is important, and we're all learning from that. There's a universal knowledge growing from that investigation and that research, which is very powerful. And there's a belief system, where the person becomes a fundamentalist, where they start believing in parts of it without proof. The guy tells you, oh, we can do this. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. There's no proof, but he says, oh, well, because science is going to figure it out. So then when you're seeing somebody describe their faith to you, like they feel their proof is that they believe in it. So then they criticize the other person for having faith, but at some point their knowledge does hit a leap of faith point that many of them take. I believe, whatever, this is what happens to you when you die. I believe this. I believe that. I believe that spiritual healing, that emotional healing that you're doing in the Amazon is not useful. It's a belief. It's not necessarily an evidence-based point of view. So there's a lot of crossover. There's observation on both sides. There's belief systems on both sides. So the skepticism is important on both sides, but also the honest observation. And so I think that science is spirituality. One of the big differences, spirituality is kind of a more holistic perspective that doesn't that allows for there to be some kind of meaningfulness to things. Science can have that, but some people use science to try to say that there is no meaning. They try to use the evidence to support that there's no purpose, there's no meaning, it's just empty, nihilistic. The materialism that they focus on. So where is that coming from? What is that? We know there are some arbitrary observations there. We know there's some things that you're not talking about. And so again, for me, in my experience, I do see that sometimes the overly rigid, you can have the new age, you can have people who are out ungrounded, unrealistic. Sure, that exists. But then on the other side, You can have the closed, like hearted, and it's a lie. It is a lie that it doesn't bother them. It is a lie that it doesn't affect their relationships, that it doesn't impact the way they relate to their families, the way they relate to the world, to nature. Yes, it does affect those things. That is an observed fact.
Well, if you can choose what you believe, I think if you can believe that when you die, your soul goes somewhere and your existence continues, or you can believe that when you die, you just lights off and you disappear. I think you should just choose. It's better to choose to believe the first option because it's more optimistic. I think it would affect the way you live your life as well. But what I was trying to say as well is very, very cutting edge science with all the numerous dimensions and parallel universes and string theories and quantum physics. It's not really that far from the spiritual way of thinking and believing in things that don't seem to be real. It's they kind of start to come together when you look into that.
No, that's true. That's true. There's the science, as if you follow the logic and the science all the way into the subatomic space, for example, then you get into this quantum physics and you get into this mysterious reality, that there's possibilities and that things don't that there's dimensions, like you mentioned, beyond what we're familiar with or what our senses are regularly attuned to. And so there's just much more to the picture, and that is clear from what the science is actually producing. So and I guess that's going to take a stronger and stronger make a stronger influence, I would imagine, over time. That some of the quantum physical properties of matter, one of the things I came across was that there's like quantum entanglement, which is considered like kind of a weird property of matter, of light, of whatever, the universe. That, for example, certain subatomic particles and photons can be entangled with one another, and then that means that they're going to be connected. And so somehow the state of one will inform the state of the other, or they could learn the state of one from the state of the other, and that could happen across distances that would indicate that it's happening instantaneous, faster than the speed of light, that it's transcendent, that it's, as far as we know, it's happening instantaneously across space-time, that this is now something proven, that this exists. That was the mathematics had indicated the possibility of that in Einstein's time. And then in the last several decades, they discovered that this is a real phenomenon. And now quantum entanglement and that those elements of the quantum physics are, my understanding, I'm not an expert of this, but that they are utilized somehow in the functioning of quantum processors. And that the quantum processors are part of what is allowing the processing speeds to go into these new, orders of magnitude that are allowing for things like artificial intelligence. Like that is maybe related to the quantum entanglement. That the mysterious nature of matter, the mysterious nature of, I don't know, this energy is currently being utilized in many different ways, and burning up, as it turns out, this artificial whatever intelligence is going to burning up a lot of energy. It's like, it's not just nothing, it's not just another computer program, it's like it's burning up a lot of energy. It's something very significant that they're tapping into to try to make all this stuff happen.
Another quantum experiment, the double slit experiment, that's very, very famous, but where the presence or the absence of the observer defines whether what they shoot out becomes a particle or a wave, which kind of means, spiritually speaking, your thought or your prayer can affect the nature of the matter, which is also scientifically proven. So it kind of explains to people pray for things, or as they say now, manifest, and you can kind of try and see and trace it to some kind of science. So yeah, this
Yeah.
is all very, very fascinating. Speaking of science, have you come across any particular studies on ayahuasca that maybe you love to share about, or psychedelics in general? Any favorite
Yeah.
studies?
When it comes to ayahuasca, I mean, I think I like the studies that are studying the traditional um, setting. So there's some, and they're like including you're in Colombia. There's some Inga. I can't remember his name, but he speaks at a lot of the conferences. And there's another lady, Tucano from Brazil, and I was part of a panel. And some of the Amazonians have asked that they don't do clinical research on ayahuasca. That they feel like that will be a pathway toward commercializing it. That will just simply try to make a product and forget about the tradition and forget about the people that taught them how to do it and the plants and everything. So they were asking people to not pursue that, and so I respect that. I understand that. And so I, like here in America, for example, our work with ayahuasca is not being done through clinical research, but through religious protection. Then we're saying, okay, we're the spiritual practice of working with the medicine is what we want to protect. That being said, there have been a few studies of ayahuasca within Shipibo context at the Temple of the Way of Light. They published a couple of research studies. One of them was on grief, like the loss of a loved one, people coming for help with grief over someone in their, a loved one that died. And they found significant results from there. Like it's a 12-day program, and they did 1 year follow up, and it stayed. The shift stayed with the person, and it wasn't not like in a strong majority. So it was a significant study, and it showed significant results. They subsequently were trying to explore, like, okay, what about working with Westerners with Shipibo medicine? How does that impact them? And they found, yes, it was very impactful. So around these cultural ideas or these cultural limitations, at least in that setting, they weren't running into that. That wasn't blocking what was happening with people. And they found that they had really significant shifts in people's sense of personal well-being and spiritual well-being. One of the things they mentioned in one of those studies I thought was very interesting was the idea of the presence of the healer. So then as we get into the tradition, we say, okay, the ayahuasca or the Yage or the molecules, that's a component of what's going on for people. But there's the ceremony and the setting and the retreat and the community and all these other elements that are there. And then you have these advanced practitioners, that are coming from traditions where they study how to work with the ceremony, and they study in a multi-generational kind of wisdom, practice, where you could imagine they could get very advanced knowledge about how to work with those settings. And so they could probably do things maybe that you never even heard of or saw before. Like no one has any idea about what they're doing. Just like if you took one of them and you brought them to, I don't know where, to Austria and said, hey, let's make a violin today. Sit down, come on, here, watch this guy. He's making the violin. Just let's do what he does. It's like something like that. And so in that study, one of the results was they showed that something like 36% of the people that received the healing said that the healer was the most significant part of their journey, more than the ayahuasca. So I thought that was interesting. When you see these multifactorial things, the other people say, oh, it's just the molecule. But then meanwhile, the evidence is like, oh, that's not what we're seeing here from the observation.
Yeah, I think the healer is a big part of it, but also the group. I've been noticing that group and the support of people, especially if you create a container that of mutual support, the group tends to play a role, almost similar on the importance to ayahuasca itself. I definitely can attest to that. I like that you mentioned this violin analogy. That brings me to one question that I wanted to ask you. You went and you worked with Chipibos and you trained to be a curandero. What are your thoughts on a lot of people that discover ayahuasca and after a few ceremonies, they start believing that, maybe they might be a shaman or trying to get an express course on how to give ayahuasca. Obviously, my opinion is that it's possible, but needs to be done respectfully and with a lot of time. And this violin analogy that he uses is very beautiful. If somebody from a jungle comes to Austria and wants to make violin, they will have to accept the reality that it's difficult and you need to train for years till you get a good violin. But for some reason, some people come and they think, ayahuasca is just giving the cup and it's very easy and they can do it basically starting tomorrow. So what would you tell those people?
Yeah, it's like, if they're very serious about it, they would want to learn more. I can understand there's an enthusiasm and they want to participate and they want to get involved, but it's not that serious, to be honest. It's like if the Shipibo goes to Austria and he says, yeah, here, I can do it in a month. And then it's like, okay, now we take his violin and we take it to the symphony. We say, okay, we're going to have the violin solo, play the violin from that person. And it's like, so no one's going to be surprised if it's like, wow, there's a lot of room for improvement there, And so if you're serious about it, if you want to just make a violin like that, and that's I don't think they're ever going to let it in the symphony again, when that one, that's okay, but you can keep doing that. But if you want to take it further, sure, there's a lot more to learn, that's number one. And so a lot of people aren't very serious about it, because to be serious about it is to be dedicated for years. Because like you said, that's what it is to make the violin like that. It takes years. So they're kind of you could say it's like a fad, they're interested. It's like they're taken by it. They're really interested, but to really evolve and become like the kind of practitioner that with the tradition, or people would say, oh, that person is well experienced, they're safe. They can handle a lot of different situations, not because they think they can, but because they already did it. I'm a doctor. It's like they don't let you out of medical school because you think you can do that surgery or this surgery. You have to do it in front of somebody else like many times before they like check the box. Okay. That's how you learn in an apprenticeship. That's the traditional way, that it's like you don't get to do it because you think you can do it. You have to actually have somebody who knows how to do it, and knows how to do it means they did it before. Like they just did it last week in front of everyone, So then that's like, it's a known thing that they were able to help that person. And so they feel confident that they can help this person, and they feel confident to evaluate, where are you at in your progress? So I think it's about patience. And I respect the passion that people have for something like that. But if they're really serious about it, then hey, they'd want to make a good violin, I would think. And if they just want to like kind of check it out for a while and mess around and kind of live a lifestyle, or maybe become the center of attention for a group of people, I don't know, all the different reasons that people might like rush into that kind of thing. Or maybe they really see a big need, they could be from that place. They see this need is so intense, they want to help so bad. But all the more reason to be careful and to learn more and to study harder, to try to go. And so I think the patience, all the traditions teach that. So then why would you think that you're the one? And so then we say, this is a Colombian, Taita. He said, if the medicine is making you feel, so we know that the medicine can confuse people. We know that. We know that the medicine can fill people's egos and kind of really strengthen their narcissism or just confusion. We see it. It happens. It's common. So then, how do you discern? How do you know? Like, hey, is it really telling me I'm the one? I'm the chosen one? And so it's just like, well, he says, if the medicine is telling you that you're more special than everybody else, or that you're different from everybody else, then it's not working. It should help you understand how you are integral to the whole. That's the sign that you're learning.
That's very wise. And the analogy I like to use is, of course, there can be a signal and a desire and calling to be a shaman or a curandero or ayahuasquero. But some people confuse the invitation letter to the university with a diploma.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's a
then,
good one right there. I like that one.
yeah, I do come up with good analogies sometimes. the what you said about violin, yeah, they can make a violin, but then at least even if it might ruin a concert, but it's not going to ruin somebody's life. And I see a shaman as
Right.
a neurosurgeon for your soul. So if he's a neurosurgeon for your soul, let's say it takes 15 years to become a neurosurgeon, and somebody can take a scalpel and they can mimic the work of a neurosurgeon, but it doesn't mean they're actually doing it well. So
Yeah.
let's move on from that topic. It's a painful one, so I guess I want to talk about it. But let's talk more about the healing. You talk about healing as a state of receptivity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. That was from Colombian healer Sochi Bukuru over there in Sasaima, not far from you. Sochi says that line. That's something that she maybe heard it from somewhere. I don't know, but she says that. She says healing is a state of receptivity, and healing is a state of consciousness. And so there's this idea that the reason to be open to the spirituality or the mystery or just those parts that we don't completely understand, but somehow are there, the quantum physics, whatever it is because there's some kind of source there for us to draw from, that the healing happens when the person is open to this kind of, it's in the psychedelic research and the MDMA research in the United States, they have come up with this idea, this innate healing intelligence, that the therapist is trying to help the person come into their innate healing intelligence, that there's something innate, that there's something fundamental to being that is nourishing and healing, that a big part of helping people is trying to help them get past all the conditioning or the ideas of all the reasons why they are not connected to that they're not good enough to be part of that if there is something sacred or if there is something quantum physical about themselves, then helping them to open that in themselves, to open that connection, that connectedness. And so that state of receptivity is being able to be open without to receiving, we say like the blessing, to receive yourself. And so then there's another element to that I'm just learning about now. I haven't read that paper, but I heard about it, that one of the new research kind of analyses of the MDMA research is saying that one of the main things that they observe is the self-compassion, that helping people find self-compassion. So there's an acceptance, in the receptivity of self, of the world, of being, that somehow puts you into a connection to an inspiring energy. There's something to that. here in Arizona, the Navajo, the Diné people, they say, walk in beauty. You know, if you walk in beauty, then in that kind of consciousness, and I think that there's a lot of gurus and people that talk about the same kind of thing, that they're trying to align their consciousness and their bodies to be able to receive the spiritual awareness that is a consciousness that reflects a healthy functioning of the body. You know, that the more harmonious it is with its environment, with its ecosystem, the more evidence that the biology that you see is that's more resilient. So that resilience from that biology, where is that coming from? You know, you say this mind state or this openness. So this idea is that maybe there is a metaphysical energy that you're tuning into, that is not just a positive attitude, but more an alignment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Walk in beauty. That's something I'll try to do tomorrow when I'm walking. Joe, I know you're writing a new book, or maybe you're finishing already. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to write a new book. I'm still writing it, but I'm towards the end, the last part. And it's about kind of what I was just talking about in a way, but what it's about is it's about how the psychedelic renaissance, and as a doctor in the research world, clinical world up here, is reopening an interest in spirituality. And similarly, the people that are through their search for healing, that go to the Amazon and go to these other cultures because of their suffering, you know, they go to seek healing, and that healing kind of turns them on to this spiritual dimension that, oh, wow, what I needed was somehow to reconnect to that. And when I allowed myself to reconnect to that, then, you know, my mental health started getting better. And so this idea that the psychedelic renaissance is reopening an interest in spirituality from a health-driven perspective that can be skeptical, that should be skeptical, that we embrace the skepticism of it. But as we embrace that skepticism, then we follow the research. You know, we follow the research, and the research is showing that, helping people connect to meaning and purpose in their lives, and a sense of sacredness is making a big difference in their emotional health and their physical health and in their mental health. And that's what the traditions have taught. And so I use the last 30 years of the clinical research, the Renaissance and psychedelics, as a framework of stories that, so I touch on the research and the science and things that we just talked about, quantum physics, things that came up in the last 30 years, including the internet, you know, all these things that have been popping up in these very interesting times in which we live, and showing just stories from my own spiritual path during that time that were like that made me kind of take more as another spiritual step. Like, oh, I was living this life, and then this made me want to do that, and then this, and then this, and then eventually, you know, be part of a spiritual community in the United States that's asking for legal protection for ayahuasca to honor the ancestral tradition, you know, because it's this dignity that you're talking about, where the healer that you see that is doing so much good, but then they don't realize he's making a beautiful violin. You know, they think it's just whatever, stones and twigs, you know, so they don't see what it is. So as we see that again and honor that again, then we're going to learn about how we've disconnected from nature so dramatically, you know, and how that's connected to a disconnection from ourselves. And so as we bridge science and spirituality again, that personal healing has the opportunity to help open our healing in our relationship with the ecosystem, but we can't discount the matters of the heart. We can't discount the mystical or the quantum physical. Like, we have to address it. Just because you don't want to talk about it doesn't mean it's going to go away. And if it's making you sick to ignore it, then now it's an economic problem. If that registers for people, now you're wasting your money. So it's exploring those topics, but it's really a series of stories is the goal.
It's a great topic. I think about that a lot personally, and I've been thinking about it just a few days ago. I think that for me personally, I was never a spiritual person, and I'm afraid to admit I am a spiritual person now, and psychedelics brought me into it. And
but
made
but we're talking about a universal spirituality. In other words, not the foolishness, but what you see. The where the rubber hits the road. And so in the tradition, the ancestral tradition, in the Inga, I'm sure, and the Shipibo and the Navajo, in the Americas, and in many other parts of the world, spirituality and health are considered the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you're connected, as you say, and you have the connection to the source, and your body is balanced, it will heal itself. And so I think about it a lot, and like coming back into spirituality and how psychedelics can help. Of course, I kind of look at it this way. At La Huayra, our motto is connect, heal, grow, which kind of nicely describes it all. You connect, then you heal, and then you grow. And the growth is also spiritual growth, where you start to understand more. And it takes a lifetime, and you're never over. But I think that I understand from seeing people, there can be people that in our culture that they think getting rich is what's going to make them happy or fulfilled, or as they say here in Colombia, pleno. You're full. You don't need anything else. Right. And it doesn't do it. So in the end, I think spirituality is inevitable. You have to go to spirituality because it is the final step. And I realized that when I interviewed Kyle Buller, a co-host of Psychedelics Today, a few weeks ago, and he had a near-death experience, and then after surviving, he had psychedelic experience, including ayahuasca experience and mushroom experience. And he says it's a very similar state of consciousness. So inevitably, maybe then when you die, you will be spiritual anyway. You go back to the spirit,
a lot of people
whether you're spiritual or not. So it's kind of like, in reality, everyone is spiritual because that's what we are. We have a soul, and whether you accept it or not, it's kind of like, what's the analogy? Well, I'm probably gonna offend somebody with this one, but if you're, let's say, if you're white and you say you're Asian, you can accept that, but in reality, you're still white. And I guess, I'm probably gonna offend somebody with this one, but
but it's back to that. It's this, like you said, like there's a truth, there's a denial. If your system is built on a denial, that's going to cause a problem for you somewhere. You're going to go and to the old Asian grandma, and she's going to say, no, you're white. I don't care what you tell me. It's going to come up because there's something there.
Like the Naked King fairy tale, the kid will say you're naked because he doesn't have that process built into him to lie. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a very interesting conversation. Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Very nice to talk to you. People can find more about me on drjoetafur.com and also on modernspirit.org. That's so they can find me there.
Great. And I wish you best of luck with your book. And I want to say this: write in beauty.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Joe.
Beautiful. I wish you all many blessings on your work down there. One day, maybe I'll go to La Huayra.
definitely come over. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you like our podcast and would like to support us and Psychedelic Revolution at large, please follow us and leave a like whenever you're listening to this podcast. Nothing in this podcast is medical advice. It's intended for educational purposes only. Con la vida, vida te la baila, cura con la guaira, limpia, limpia.